There is a special kind of pain that comes when the people who should protect your gift are the very ones trying to crush it. It is deeply exhausting when love gets twisted into control, and when a young person has to fight for the right to become who they already know they are. In these stories, the worst wounds do not come from strangers. They come from parents who mock talent, steal chances, and try to replace truth with fear. But that kind of control never stays hidden forever. Somewhere ahead tonight, one writer will stand in front of a room full of people and finally say out loud what was done to him, and that moment changes everything. So if you have ever been made to feel small for caring deeply about something beautiful, stay close. There is real backbone in these stories, real pushback, and real peace waiting on the other side. And now, let us settle in and read the very first story together. My parents locked me inside to make sure I missed the only audition that could have saved me, so I did something worse than running away. I knew something was wrong the second I tried to open my bedroom door, and the handle didn't turn all the way, like someone had quietly decided my life was over while I slept. I jiggled it harder, heart already racing, and then I heard my dad, Marcus, from the other side, calm like he was explaining a rule I should have always understood. He said, "You're staying home today, Daniel," and I swear I felt something in my chest actually drop, like an elevator cable snapping. Today was the audition. Not someday, not maybe, today. I slammed the door and shouted back that he couldn't do this, that I was 18 in 2 months, that this was my shot, and he just laughed like I'd told a joke at dinner. My mom, Elaine, chimed in softer, almost sad, saying I needed to stop embarrassing myself and the family, that this music obsession had gone too far. Obsession. That's what they called the only thing that ever made me feel like I wasn't suffocating in my own house. They had already destroyed my closet studio 2 nights earlier, ripping out the foam panels, snapping my cheap mic stand, and smashing my audio interface against the wall like it had personally insulted them, all while telling me this was for my own good. I had begged them to stop, literally on my knees, and Marcus had leaned down and said if I ever touched an instrument again, I could find somewhere else to live because he would not fund a failure. So I hid the one thing they didn't find, my old acoustic guitar, under the floorboard I'd loosened months ago, because part of me always knew it might come to this. The audition had come out of nowhere. A local scout named Trevor who heard one of my recordings that a friend, Jason, posted without telling me, and he said I had something real, something raw, and he wanted me in front of people who mattered. I didn't even tell my parents at first because I knew exactly how they'd react, but they found the email on my laptop, printed it out, and that's when everything escalated from constant criticism to full control. They forged a reply from me declining the audition. I saw the sent message myself, and when I confronted them, Elaine said it was a blessing in disguise, and Marcus said I should thank him for saving me from humiliation. Now I was locked in my room with my phone missing, my laptop gone, and the clock ticking toward the only moment that could have changed everything. I started pacing, trying to think, trying not to panic, but every thought slammed into the same wall. They were going to keep me here until it was over, and then they'd pretend it never existed. That's what they always did, erase anything that didn't fit the version of me they wanted. The version that studied finance like Marcus, the version that didn't write songs at 3 a.m. about feeling invisible in his own home. I checked the window, 2nd floor, too high to jump without breaking something, and the backyard gate was always locked anyway. I shouted again, threatened to call the police, and Marcus just said, "With what phone?" And I hated how calculated that was, how far they'd thought this through. That's when something shifted in me, because up until then I'd always been reacting. Always trying to argue or negotiate or prove I wasn't crazy for wanting this. But standing there staring at that locked door, I realized they weren't going to change, not today, not ever. And if I didn't do something drastic right now, this would be the story of my life, almost. I went to the loose floorboard, pried it up with my fingers, and pulled out the guitar, the wood scratched but intact, strings slightly out of tune but still playable. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it, but muscle memory kicked in, and I started playing the song I had planned for the audition, the one Trevor said felt like it had a pulse of its own. At first I didn't even know why I was playing. It felt pointless, like screaming into a void, but then I remembered something Jason said when he uploaded my track, that the internet doesn't care about locked doors, and suddenly I had a plan that was reckless enough to work. I grabbed my old MP3 recorder from my desk drawer, the one they overlooked because it looked like junk, hit record and played like my life depended on it, because it did, pouring everything into that take, every bit of anger, fear and stubborn refusal to disappear. When I finished, I didn't stop. I recorded another song, and another, my fingers hurting, my voice cracking until I had something undeniable. Then I moved to the vent near my closet, unscrewed the cover with a coin, and reached in until I found the small burner phone I'd hidden months ago after the first time they threatened to cut me off from everyone. I powered it on, praying the battery hadn't died, and when the screen lit up, I felt this surge of adrenaline so strong it made me dizzy. I called Jason, told him everything in one breath, and he didn't hesitate, just said send him whatever I had and he'd take care of the rest. I held the recorder up to the phone's speaker and played the tracks, crude and messy but real, and Jason uploaded them everywhere he could, tagging Trevor, tagging local venues, tagging anyone who might listen. Meanwhile, Marcus started banging on the door, yelling for me to stop making noise, and I just kept playing louder, like I wanted the whole street to hear what they were trying to bury. Minutes felt like hours, and then Jason called back, his voice half laughing, half shocked, saying Trevor had seen it, that he was asking where I was, why I wasn't at the audition. I grabbed the phone and left a voicemail for Trevor, explaining everything, not caring how insane it sounded, just telling the truth for once without filtering it through fear. Then I sat on the floor, back against the door, guitar in my lap, listening to my parents argue in the hallway about what to do next, and for the first time I didn't feel small. About an hour later there was a knock at the front door. Not the controlled, familiar knock of a neighbor, but something official, firm, and when Marcus opened it, I heard a different voice, calm and authoritative, asking to speak with me. It turned out Trevor didn't just passively watch clips online. He showed up with a local community coordinator named Lindu, who apparently knew about youth rights and didn't appreciate hearing that someone was being confined to miss an opportunity. I heard Marcus trying to spin it, saying I was unstable, that I needed discipline, but it didn't hold up when I started shouting through the door that I wanted out and that they'd taken my phone and locked me in. The lock clicked open a few minutes later, and when the door swung open, Marcus looked furious. Elaine looked like she might cry, and standing behind them was Trevor, real, not just a name in an email, looking straight at me like I was already on a stage. He didn't say anything dramatic, just asked if I still wanted the audition, and I said yes before he even finished the sentence. I walked out of that room with my guitar in my hand, past my parents who suddenly had nothing left to say that mattered, and got into Trevor's car without looking back. The audition wasn't perfect. My voice wavered and my hands were still shaking, but it was honest, and for the first time no one told me to be quieter or more realistic or less myself. I don't live in that house anymore. Marcus did follow through on his threat, just not the way he expected, because I chose to leave before he could throw me out. Elaine sent a few messages saying she hopes I come to my senses, but I stopped waiting for that version of me to exist. The songs I recorded in that locked room are out there now, not polished, not safe, but real enough that people listen. And every time I think about that door not opening, I remember that the worst thing they did wasn't locking me in. It was trying to convince me I didn't deserve a way out, and I'm done believing that. Daniel walked out of that locked room with a guitar and a kind of hard calm that comes from finally refusing to be small. He kept his voice steady, even when his hands shook, and he let other people witness what his parents tried to bury. The plan they used to silence him failed because he built his own back door and used it, and that showed everyone how brittle their control really was. That lesson matters because erasure is a tactic, and when someone finds a way to push back, it gives the next writer a map. So let us turn to the next story together and see how someone else fought to be heard after being erased. My parents erased me from the internet and tried to replace me with their version of who I should be. The email said my account had been permanently suspended for impersonation, and for a second, I honestly thought it was a phishing scam because there was no way anyone would think I was impersonating myself. I was in the middle of uploading a new video when the page refreshed, and everything just disappeared like it had never existed, like the last 2 years of my life were a glitch that finally got patched out. My channel was called Night Glass, and nobody knew it was me except one person, and even he only knew part of the truth. I built it from zero in my bedroom after school, editing on a beat-up laptop, recording voiceovers under a blanket so my parents would not hear me talking about things they called pointless. It grew slowly at first, then all at once. 50 subscribers turned into 5,000, then 50,000. I started getting messages from people saying my stuff mattered to them, that it helped them get through nights where everything felt too loud in their heads. It was the first time anything I made felt real. Then my parents found it. I did not even know how until later, but that morning I got the suspension email. My bedroom door slammed open and my father, Daniel, walked in holding a printed screenshot of my channel like it was evidence in a trial. My mother, Karen, stood behind him with her arms crossed, already looking disappointed before I said a single word. Daniel asked me why I was pretending to be someone else online, why I was lying about my identity, why I was embarrassing the family with this anonymous nonsense. I tried to explain that the pseudonym was the point, that Night Glass was not a lie. It was the only place I felt honest, but he cut me off and said honesty meant using the name they gave me, not hiding behind a fake persona like a coward. Karen said I was clearly being influenced by strangers, and that it was dangerous, that people online manipulate kids into thinking they are special when they are not. Then Daniel told me they had already reported the account for impersonation and submitted proof that I was violating platform rules. I remember laughing because it sounded insane, like they were joking, but he showed me the report confirmation on his phone, and that was the moment my stomach dropped because I realized they had planned this. They had gathered screenshots, written statements, even attached a copy of my school ID to prove that the person behind Night Glass was misrepresenting himself. They framed it like I was pretending to be a different person entirely, not just using a name. It was deliberate, calculated. By the time the suspension email hit my inbox, they were already moving to the next step. Daniel took my laptop, my phone, even my old tablet from the drawer. Karen said from now on all my internet usage would be monitored and limited to school work only. They installed tracking software on the family computer and somehow even got access to the school portal to flag my account for supervision, which meant every time I logged in at the library, there was a notification that my activity was being recorded. It felt like being watched from inside my own skin. I tried to appeal the suspension using a library computer, but every form asked for verification tied to the original account, which I no longer had access to because my parents had already changed the recovery email. That was when I realized they were not just punishing me, they were erasing me. The only person who knew about Night Glass was my friend Marcus, and I had trusted him because he was the one who first told me my videos were actually good. We met after school behind the gym one day, and I told him everything that happened, expecting him to be angry on my behalf. Instead, he avoided eye contact and kept fidgeting with his sleeve. Then he said he was sorry and admitted my parents had talked to him 2 days earlier. Karen had called his mother and invited him over, sat him down, and asked questions about what I did online. He said he tried to play dumb at first, but Daniel offered to help him get a new gaming console if he cooperated, and eventually he told them about the backup email I used for recovery. I felt like the ground tilted under me. It was not just that they had taken my channel, they had turned the one person I trusted into another tool. Marcus kept apologizing, saying he did not think it would go this far, that he thought they just wanted to understand, but it did not matter. The damage was done. That night I made a decision that scared me more than anything I had done before. If they wanted to erase me, I was going to make it impossible. I went to the public library early the next morning and created a new account using a completely different network, different credentials, everything isolated. I started reuploading my content from memory, recreating scripts, re-editing clips I had saved on a hidden USB I kept taped under a desk at school. It was not perfect, but it was mine. I also recorded a video explaining what happened, not naming my parents, but describing the situation in detail, how someone could lose everything because of a false report, how identity online is fragile when someone with power decides to redefine you. I did not expect it to reach anyone, I just needed it to exist. Within a week, the video started spreading. People shared it, commented, asked questions. Some even recognized similarities between my old style and the new account. Then something I did not expect happened. The platform reviewed my case again, after a wave of reports flagged the original suspension as abuse of the reporting system. They asked for clarification, and this time I provided everything from a neutral location, including timestamps, original files, and proof that Night Glass had always been me. A few days later, I got another email. My original channel was reinstated. When I got home that day, Daniel and Karen were waiting for me in the living room. Daniel held his phone up, showing my channel restored, subscriber count climbing even higher because of the attention. He looked furious in a way I had never seen before, not loud, just controlled and cold. He said I had gone behind their backs and made them look like villains. I told him they did that themselves. Karen tried to say they were protecting me, that I did not understand the risks, but I interrupted her and said I understood exactly what they did. They tried to erase me because I was not the version they wanted. There was a long silence, the kind that feels like something is about to snap. Then Daniel said if I continued, I would not be allowed to live in that house anymore. It was meant to scare me into backing down. Instead, it clarified everything. I told him I would figure something out. That night, I packed a bag and went to stay with my Uncle Peter, who had always been the only adult in the family who treated me like a person instead of a project. He did not ask many questions. He just gave me a place to sleep and a desk to work at. Over the next months, my channel grew beyond anything I imagined. I kept my identity private, but this time it was on my terms, not hidden out of fear. My parents tried to contact me, tried to negotiate, even tried to claim they supported me now, but I stopped responding. They had their chance and they chose control over understanding. The last time I checked, they had posted a long message on social media about how difficult it is to raise a rebellious teenager in the digital age, framing themselves as victims of a system that encourages kids to reject their families. I did not respond to that either. I did not need to, because for the first time my voice was louder than theirs, and no one could take it away without exposing exactly what they were trying to do. Night Glass did not vanish because it was weak, it was attacked because it mattered, and that is the cruel logic of people who want to erase someone else's truth. The writer rebuilt the account piece by piece, and used the attention the attack created to expose the lie, which made the attempt to control them backfire. That is the strength these parents never respected, the quiet stubbornness to prove existence by making art again. Now we move to the next story where a similar pattern appears, and we will see how proof can break a false narrative and reclaim what was stolen. They stole my designs, gave them to my cousin, and then tried to convince me I made it all up. I knew something was wrong the second I saw Daniel Kim's name printed under my jacket on the finalist board, because that asymmetrical sleeve with the hand-stitched beadwork was something I spent 87 hours on alone in my room, while my parents thought I was doing physics homework. I was standing in the crowded atrium of the Johannesburg Youth Design Expo, surrounded by mannequins and judges and cameras. And there it was, my entire collection, 6 looks, every stitch mine, displayed under my cousin's name like I had never existed. For a second, I honestly thought I was going to pass out. My hands went cold and I could hear my heartbeat louder than the music they were playing. I pushed through people until I was right up against the display, staring at details only I would know, like the tiny mistake in the inner lining of the third piece where I had pricked my finger and left a faint mark I never fully cleaned. It was still there, proof that I wasn't insane. Daniel walked up beside me like he owned the air around him, smiling for a photographer, and when he noticed me, his smile flickered just for a second before snapping back into place. He said my name like we were friends, like he hadn't just stolen months of my life. I asked him straight up how he got my designs. He didn't even lower his voice. He just said, "Your parents submitted them, man. They said you didn't want to compete anymore." I laughed because it sounded so stupid, like a prank, but my stomach was already sinking because it made too much sense. My parents had been weirdly calm the past few weeks, asking fewer questions about my work, telling me to focus on exams, reminding me that fashion was just a phase. I left the expo without saying anything else to Daniel, because I knew if I stayed, I was either going to scream or do something worse. And I took a taxi home, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles hurt, rehearsing what I was going to say. When I walked into the house, my mom, Lindy, was in the kitchen like nothing had happened, chopping vegetables, humming, and my dad, Victor, was on the couch watching the news. I didn't even take off my shoes. I just said, "Why did you submit my designs under Daniel's name?" They both looked at me like I had spoken in another language. My dad muted the TV slowly and asked what I was talking about. Calm, controlled, the same tone he used when he was about to dismantle me piece by piece. I told them everything, the expo, the display, Daniel's name, the exact pieces. My mom actually laughed, like a soft, confused laugh, and said, "Thabo, you didn't even finish your application, remember? You were stressed, you said you weren't ready." I felt my chest tighten. I said, "No, I finished it. I showed you the confirmation email." My dad shook his head, already disappointed in me, already rewriting reality. He said, "You've been overworking yourself, you're mixing things up. Daniel has always been talented, maybe you're projecting." That word hit harder than anything else. Projecting, like my work wasn't even mine to begin with. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my emails, but the confirmation was gone. Not in spam, not archived, just gone. My hand started shaking. I knew I hadn't deleted it. My mom stepped closer and put a hand on my shoulder, gentle, almost sympathetic, and said, "We're worried about you. You've been obsessed with this fashion thing." Healthy? I pushed her hand off and went to my room, already knowing what I was going to find but still hoping I was wrong. My sketchbooks were there, but half the pages were missing. My external drive where I kept all my digital patterns was wiped clean. Not corrupted, not damaged, just empty. It felt like someone had reached into my head and erased parts of me. I went back downstairs and demanded they tell me what they did. This time my dad stood up and the calm dropped. He said even if those were your designs, which is debatable, they were derivative. You copy what you see online and call it original. Daniel has discipline. He has a future. You needed a reality check. I think that was the moment something in me snapped from confusion into clarity. They weren't denying it anymore, not really. They were reframing it, twisting it into a lesson like they were doing me a favor. I said, "You stole my work." My mom's expression hardened and she said, "We protected you from embarrassing yourself. Do you know what judges say about kids like you? Amateur, unfocused. We saved you from that, and Daniel will make something of it. At least it stays in the family." I remember laughing then, but it sounded wrong, like it was coming from someone else. I went back to my room and locked the door, and for the next hour I just sat there staring at the empty folders on my laptop until my anger finally caught up to my shock. They thought they had erased everything, but they forgot one thing. I had been documenting the entire process on a private account under a fake name, posting progress shots, timestamps, close-ups, everything, because I never trusted them not to interfere. I logged in and scrolled through months of work, every piece documented from concept to final stitch. My hands steadied for the first time that day. The next morning I went back to the expo, straight to the registration desk, and asked to speak to one of the coordinators, a woman named Priya Naidu. I showed her the account, the dates, the progression, the details that matched the collection on display perfectly. She didn't say much at first, just kept scrolling, her expression getting tighter. Then she asked if I was willing to make a formal complaint, because if what I was showing her was legitimate, it meant the submission had been fraudulent. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. Within an hour, everything started unraveling. They pulled Daniel aside, then the judges, then the organizers who had handled submissions. Turns out the application had been sent from my home IP address, with files that matched mine exactly, just renamed and slightly reordered. When confronted, Daniel tried to play dumb at first, saying my parents had given him the designs and told him I had backed out, but the more they pressed, the more it became obvious he knew it was wrong. By the afternoon, the collection was removed from judging, and there was this tense buzz around the expo as word spread. I stood off to the side, watching people whisper, watching the mannequins get wheeled away, feeling this strange mix of vindication and grief. Priya came back to me later and said they couldn't reinstate me as a finalist because of submission deadlines and rules, but they were issuing a formal statement about the fraud, and they wanted to feature my work separately with proper credit. It wasn't the same as competing, but it was something real, something with my name on it. When I got home that night, my parents were waiting. They already knew. My dad looked furious, not guilty, just angry that I had gone outside the narrative they built. He said I had humiliated the family. My mom said I had blown things out of proportion. I didn't argue this time. I just told them I was done letting them decide what was real for me. I packed a bag, grabbed what was left of my materials, and left to stay with my friend Musa, who had been telling me for months that something about my situation wasn't normal. Lying on his couch that night, exhausted and still wired, I kept replaying everything, the gaslighting, the missing files, the way they tried to make me doubt my own memory. But now I had proof not just for them, but for myself. They could call my work trash, derivative, whatever made them feel in control, but they couldn't erase it anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't crazy for wanting something that was actually mine. Thabo found the one thing his parents forgot to wipe: the private account full of timestamps and progress photos, and that tiny oversight became the wedge that forced the truth out into daylight. The fraud collapsed under evidence because documentation is a tool, and when a writer knows what they made, they can show it to the world without waiting for permission. That recovery is not neat or quick, but it is real, and it teaches the next person how to hold on to facts when memory gets gaslit. So we will read the next story and watch someone pull themselves out of a long undermining campaign by owning the narrative again. I found out my parents were secretly destroying my art career, and it gets worse. I realized something was seriously wrong the night I hit upload, and my phone lit up with 5 comments in under a minute, all of them tearing me apart in the exact same tone my mom uses when she is pretending to be calm. I am 17, my name is Caleb, and posting my art online was supposed to be my way out, or at least my way forward, but that night it felt like I had just walked into a room where everyone already hated me. The accounts were random at first glance, names like Art Truth 89 and Real Critic Jake, but every comment had the same structure: the same weirdly specific comparisons. Like, this reminds me of Daniel Cho's early work, except Daniel actually understood anatomy at your age. And that name hit me because Daniel Cho is a kid from my school. My parents bring up constantly like he is some kind of gold standard I am failing to meet. I tried to brush it off as internet trolls because that is what everyone says to do, but the timing was too perfect and the wording felt too personal, like whoever was behind those accounts knew exactly which buttons to press. The next day at breakfast, my dad, Marcus, casually mentioned that Daniel had just gotten into a summer program in New York and then looked at me like he was waiting for me to react. And my mom, Elena, added that maybe I should focus on something more realistic because not everyone is cut out for art. And it felt like those comments from the night before were sitting at the table with us. I started testing it after that, posting at weird hours, changing styles, even uploading unfinished sketches. And every time the same thing happened, instant comments, always comparing me to someone else, always suggesting I quit or pivot to something practical. And it got to the point where I could predict the exact phrasing before it even appeared. The breaking point came when one account, Mentor Liam, messaged me privately and said he liked my work but thought I needed serious guidance if I wanted to avoid embarrassing myself when applying to art schools, and I was desperate enough by then to listen. Liam sounded legit. He had a profile full of decent work, talked like he knew the industry, and he pointed out flaws in my pieces that actually made sense, which made me trust him even more because it was not just blind negativity, it felt constructive. He suggested we do weekly critiques and even helped me rework my portfolio, slowly pushing me to scrap pieces I loved because they were immature or derivative. And every time I hesitated, he would bring up artists my parents always compared me to, like Daniel or some girl named Priya Shah who apparently had already won competitions, and it felt like the whole world agreed I was behind. Over a month, my portfolio stopped looking like mine, and more like something safe and generic. And then one night Liam told me straight up that I was not ready for submissions, and that if I sent my current work, I would just humiliate myself and ruin my chances long term. And I believed him because by then my confidence was basically gone. 2 days later, his account disappeared completely. Messages gone, profile gone, like he never existed. And that is when something in me finally snapped because it was too convenient, too clean, like a setup that had served its purpose. I started digging in a way I had not before, checking IP logs from my posts, looking at timestamps, cross-referencing when my parents were home or on their phones. And I know that sounds paranoid, but the patterns were undeniable, especially when I noticed that the critical comments stopped entirely during a 3-hour window one evening when our internet went down, and my parents were both in the living room complaining about it. I confronted them that night, not yelling at first, just asking if they knew anything about those accounts. And my mom's face did this split-second flicker like she had been caught off guard. But then she recovered and laughed it off, said I was being dramatic, said the internet is full of cruel people. But my dad got defensive in a way that did not match the question, telling me I should be grateful anyone was giving me feedback at all. That was enough for me to push harder, and I mentioned Liam specifically, and that is when my mom slipped. She said that Mentor was trying to help you, and then immediately tried to walk it back, but it was too late because she should not have known about him at all. The argument exploded after that, and they admitted it in pieces, like they were still trying to control the narrative even while confessing, saying they created the accounts to toughen me up, to make sure I did not get false confidence, and that they paid Liam, whose real name was apparently Victor Alvarez, a struggling artist my dad found through some forum, to guide me in a realistic direction, which translated to convincing me I was not good enough to even try. I asked them why, like actually why go that far, and my dad said something that I do not think I will ever forget. He said failure in public would be worse than quitting in private, and they were trying to protect me from becoming a joke. That was the moment it shifted for me from confusion to something colder, because it was not just controlling, it was calculated. They had been orchestrating my self-doubt like it was some kind of long-term project. I locked myself in my room after that and went back through everything, every comment, every critique, every suggestion to compare myself to someone else, and I realized how much of my thinking was not even mine anymore. It was this echo of their voices filtered through fake identities. The next morning I did something I had been too scared to do for months. I submitted my original portfolio, not the watered-down version Liam had pushed me toward, but the messy, weird, very me collection of pieces I had almost deleted. And I did it knowing my parents would find out because I used our home computer on purpose. When they confronted me, it was not even a conversation. It was them listing all the ways I was setting myself up to fail, all the people who were better than me, all the reasons I should withdraw, and for the first time I did not argue. I just let them talk and then told them I already sent it and there was nothing they could do. The fallout was immediate. They took my phone, cut off my internet access, even tried to contact the program to withdraw my submission. But by then I had already emailed the admissions office directly from a friend's account, explaining the situation in just enough detail to make them aware something weird was going on without sounding unhinged. Weeks passed like that, tense and quiet, until an email came through that I only saw because my friend Jordan let me log in at school, and it said I had been accepted into the program with a partial scholarship, and they specifically mentioned that my work stood out for its originality and voice. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time, because it felt like proof that everything my parents had engineered was built on a lie. And when I finally went home and told them, there was this moment where neither of them knew what to say, because the outcome they had been trying to prevent had happened anyway. I wish I could say that fixed everything, but it did not. It just made the truth impossible to ignore. And now I am counting down the days until I can leave for that program, not just to study art, but to finally hear my own thoughts again, without them being drowned out by comparisons I never asked for. Caleb discovered that manufactured doubt can look like care when parents dress control up as protection, and once he recognized the pattern, he submitted the raw work that proved him right. Acceptance followed because the art held its own truth, and that is the exact moment these stories keep returning to the work telling on the lie. That same stubborn faith in the creative self shows up in the next piece, where a stage invitation becomes the center of a family war, and we will see how a writer risks everything to stay connected to an audience. I got invited to open for a band, and my parents destroyed my life to stop it. I was halfway through my third song when Tyler from Glass Harbor leaned over my mic and said into the crowd that I was opening for them next Friday whether I liked it or not, and everyone actually cheered like I belonged there, like I wasn't just some kid sneaking minutes at the end of their set. And I swear that was the exact moment my life split into before and after, because I didn't even make it home before my mom, Denise, had already heard about it from someone at church and was waiting in the kitchen with that tight smile she uses when she's decided something about me needs to be corrected. She didn't ask how it went or who I met. She just said we need to talk about the situation, and then started in on how performing in bars is unsafe, and how people like Tyler are bad influences, and how I was getting ideas above my station, which is her favorite phrase, and I tried to explain that it wasn't a bar. It was a licensed venue with actual security, and that they wanted me because they liked my music, not because I begged. But she just kept nodding in that fake calm way while my dad, Mark, scrolled on his phone like he was bored until he finally said this ends tonight, and I felt something drop in my stomach, because when he uses that tone it means he's already made a plan I don't know about yet. The next day Tyler texted me asking if I could come by rehearsal, and I didn't even get to answer because my phone buzzed once and then went dead in my hand, like it had been remotely killed. And when I looked up, my dad was standing in the doorway, holding my charger and smiling like he'd just solved a puzzle. And he said you can have this back when you prove you can prioritize your future, which in their language means doing exactly what they want and nothing else. And I remember thinking, okay, this is bad, but I'll figure it out. I'll just go in person. They can't stop me from leaving the house. I was wrong about that too. By the time I walked to the venue that afternoon, the vibe was completely different. Like I had walked into a room where everyone had already decided something about me, and I was the last one to find out. And Tyler didn't even meet my eyes at first. He just kept fiddling with his guitar until I asked him what was going on, and he said my parents had called him, and it took me a second to even process that, because why would they have his number? But then he told me my mom had introduced herself as a concerned parent, and my dad had followed up with a long email about my mental health, about how I had episodes and made threats and wasn't stable in group environments, and I actually laughed at first because it sounded so ridiculous. Like a bad joke, until I saw Tyler's face and realized he believed at least part of it, or enough of it to be scared. And he said they couldn't take the risk with the venue's liability, and that maybe I should focus on getting better before trying to perform publicly. I don't remember exactly what I said after that because it felt like my brain was lagging behind reality, but I know I kept saying that none of it was true, and that they were lying, and that they were trying to control me. And the more I insisted, the more it probably sounded like I was proving their point. which is the part that still makes me feel sick because it was such a perfect trap. They had basically poisoned the well so anything I said would look like denial instead of defense. I walked home in this kind of tunnel vision, already rehearsing how I was going to confront them. And when I got there, they were both sitting at the table like they had been waiting for me to catch up to the version of events they had already finalized. And my mom said, "We heard you went to see those boys today," and I snapped and asked them what the hell they told Tyler, and my dad didn't even deny it. He just said we told him the truth as we understand it, and that we have a responsibility to protect you and others from your instability. And I remember feeling this rush of heat because I've never been diagnosed with anything, never been in trouble, nothing, and suddenly I'm being described like I'm dangerous. And when I said that, he leaned forward and said perception matters more than facts in situations like this, which is the most honest thing he's ever said to me and also the worst. That was the midpoint for me because I realized arguing wasn't going to change anything, and that if I wanted any part of my life back, I was going to have to go around them, not through them. So I started planning in my head right there while pretending to shut down, nodding and saying I understood, because that's what they reward, compliance. And for a few days, I played along while quietly trying to rebuild some kind of connection to the outside world. Borrowing a friend's phone at school to message Tyler and explain what really happened, writing out everything in detail so it didn't sound like a rant, asking him to just meet me once without my parents involved. And for a second, it almost worked because he replied that he'd think about it and that he was sorry if he misjudged me, and I felt this small crack of hope open up. It didn't last. 3 days later, my parents pulled me out of school in the middle of the day and told me we were taking a drive. And I should have known something was off because my dad had that same calm tone again. And about an hour later, we pulled up to this campus I had never seen before, way outside the city, and my mom said, "We found a better environment for you, somewhere you can focus without distractions." And I realized what they were doing just as they handed a folder to the receptionist with my name already printed on it, already enrolled, already decided. And I started arguing then, really arguing, saying I didn't consent, that I had friends, that I had commitments. And my dad just said, "You're a minor, you don't get a vote on this," and that was it, my entire life reduced to a technicality. The school had no music program, no art rooms, nothing except standard classes and a lot of rules about structure and discipline. And they took my phone on the first day under the policy of limited electronics, which my parents had specifically chosen. And just like that, every connection I had built was gone. No Tyler, no venue, no audience, nothing, just silence and this constant feeling that I had been erased and replaced with a version of me they could manage. Weeks went by and I could feel myself starting to shrink into that version, which scared me more than anything because it meant their plan was working. So I made one last move that I knew could blow up everything, but also might be my only shot. I went to the school counselor, Mr. Patel, and I told him everything, not just about the band but about the lies, the manipulation, the isolation, how my parents had constructed this narrative of me as unstable to control where I could go and who I could be. And I expected him to dismiss it or call them, but instead he asked for specifics, dates, names, copies of messages. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt like someone was actually evaluating facts instead of accepting their version by default. It took another 2 weeks of meetings and statements, and me writing everything down in painful detail, but eventually it escalated to the district level, and then to someone who actually contacted the venue and Tyler independently, and once those conversations happened, without my parents filtering them, the whole story started to unravel in a way that was almost surreal to watch, because the same tactic that had trapped me before now worked against them. Perception mattered more than facts until the facts were verified, and once they were, the perception flipped hard. My parents tried to spin it as concern, as misunderstanding, but there were too many inconsistencies, too many exaggerations that didn't hold up. And the final blow was when Tyler showed them the emails my dad had sent, full of claims he couldn't back up. And suddenly they weren't the calm, responsible adults anymore. They were the ones who looked unstable, who looked like they were willing to say anything to control their kid. I didn't get everything back, not immediately, but I got enough: my phone, monitored but mine, permission to transfer back after the term. And most importantly, a call from Tyler saying the slot was still open if I wanted it, no pressure, just an offer based on what he actually heard from me this time. And when I stood on that stage a month later, opening for them like he originally promised, it felt different, not just because I had fought for it, but because I knew exactly what it had cost and exactly who had tried to take it away. And I played harder than I ever have in my life, not to prove anything to my parents, but to make sure that version of me they tried to isolate and erase didn't win. Mark and Denise tried to turn Tyler's invitation into a danger story, but their fear could not erase the fact that their child had been chosen for a stage. They poisoned the well with lies, and then acted shocked when everyone started looking at him through their fear, which is a profoundly unkind way to steal a future. Still, he kept reaching for truth by going around them and speaking to someone outside the family, and that is why the control started to crack. The next story carries that same heavy feeling of being watched and judged, and we are going there together now. My parents stole my future and tried to convince everyone I was insane. I knew something was wrong the second I opened my banking app and saw my balance at zero, because 3 nights earlier I had stood in the back room of Sifo's convenience store, counting out 84.20 Rand in crumpled notes and coins I had earned stocking shelves and mopping floors. Money I had been saving for almost a year for a photography course I never told my parents about, and now it was just gone like it had never existed. And when I walked into the kitchen holding my phone with my hands shaking, my mother Linda didn't even look surprised. She just stirred her tea and said we needed to talk, which is her favorite phrase before she ruins something important to me. And my father Martin folded his newspaper slowly like he had been rehearsing this moment. And that is when I realized this was not a mistake. This was something they planned, something deliberate, and I felt this cold drop in my chest like I had just stepped off a cliff but had not hit the ground yet. They told me they had accessed my account because family comes first, and there were urgent expenses. I was too immature to understand, and when I asked what expenses could possibly justify draining every cent I had worked for, Martin said electricity, groceries, and a vague debt to a relative I barely knew. And when I pushed back and said my name was on that account and they had no right, Linda smiled in that tight way she does when she thinks she is teaching me a lesson, and said everything I have belongs to the family because I still live under their roof. And then she added that this photography obsession was a phase, and it was better they intervened before I wasted money on something useless. And I felt my throat close because this was not just about money. This was about control, about making sure I never had the means to leave or build something of my own. I tried to argue, but Martin cut me off and said if I kept being ungrateful, he would cancel my phone plan and pull me out of school support entirely. And he said it calmly like it was just another reasonable option. And that is when I realized arguing with them was like arguing with a wall that could punish me. That night I barely slept. I just lay there replaying every shift I worked, every time I said no to going out with friends because I was saving, every photo I took on my cheap second-hand camera dreaming about something bigger, and it all felt stolen, not just the money but the future it represented. The next morning I made a decision that scared me more than anything I had done before. I applied for a scholarship to the photography course anyway, because they offered partial funding for students with financial hardship, and I wrote the most honest application of my life about working part-time, saving independently, and wanting to build a career in visual storytelling. And for a moment I felt something like hope again, like maybe I could still get out from under them. 2 weeks later, I got an email saying I had been shortlisted for an interview, and I had to read it 3 times to make sure it was real. And I remember sitting on the edge of my bed gripping my phone so hard my fingers hurt, thinking this might actually be my way out. My one chance to prove I was not just the failure my parents kept comparing me to every time they brought up my cousin Daniel, who was studying accounting and making something of himself. I kept everything secret. I used a friend's laptop at school to prepare. I stayed late pretending to study while practicing answers. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward instead of being dragged backward. The interview went better than I expected. The panel was kind, especially a woman named Priya who asked about my portfolio and actually listened when I spoke. And when I left the room, I felt like I had done enough, like even if I did not get it, I had proven something to myself. 3 days later, I got another email asking for additional documentation and saying they had received a concerning call about me from a family member, and my stomach dropped so hard I thought I was going to throw up right there in the school corridor, because I knew immediately who it was. And when I read the rest of the message, my hands started shaking again, because it said the caller had expressed concerns about my mental stability, claiming I had a history of emotional instability, impulsive behavior, and difficulty handling responsibility, and that they were worried I might not be able to complete the program safely. I went cold, completely cold, because this was not just control anymore. This was sabotage, and it was calculated, because they knew exactly how to undermine me in a way that would sound credible to strangers. I confronted them that night, and at first they denied everything. But when I mentioned the exact wording from the email, Linda's face changed just slightly, enough for me to see the truth. And Martin sighed like I was exhausting him and said they were only trying to protect me from making a mistake I would regret. And that sometimes parents have to step in even if their children do not understand. And I asked if lying about my mental health was part of that protection. And he said if the truth sounds like a lie, maybe I should think about why that is. And I swear something snapped in me right then, because I realized they were not going to stop. Not ever, not unless I forced something to change. The next day I emailed the scholarship committee back with everything. I explained the financial situation, the unauthorized withdrawal, the pattern of control, and I attached bank statements and even a written statement from SIFO confirming my employment and earnings. And it felt like I was exposing my entire life to strangers. But I did not have a choice anymore, because staying silent meant losing everything. Then I did something I had been too scared to do before. I went to the bank in person and spoke to a manager named Thabo, and I told him my parents had accessed my account without permission. And at first he looked skeptical, but when I showed him the transaction history and explained that I had never authorized any transfers, his expression changed, and he said we could open an investigation and that there were legal implications if signatures had been forged. And hearing that word forged made everything feel real in a way it had not before, like this was not just a family issue, this was something serious. The days that followed were the longest of my life. My parents acted like nothing had happened, like we were still some normal family, but there was this tension under everything, like a wire pulled too tight, and I stopped speaking to them unless absolutely necessary, because every word felt like it could be twisted against me. A week later, I got a call from Priya from the scholarship panel, and my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear her at first. But then she said they had reviewed my explanation and the evidence, and while they could not comment on the family situation directly, they believed my account and wanted to move forward with offering me the scholarship. And I had to sit down because my legs just gave out under me. And I remember staring at the floor while she kept talking about next steps and orientation dates, and all I could think was I did not lose, not this time. When I hung up, I felt something I had not felt in years, something like control over my own life. And later that same day, Thabo called to inform me that the bank had confirmed irregularities in the authorization process and would be reversing the transactions pending further investigation, and that legal action might follow if I chose to pursue it. And I just sat there holding the phone, realizing that everything my parents tried to bury was coming back to the surface. That night, I packed a bag and went to stay with my friend Jason. And when Linda called demanding to know where I was, I told her I was done being controlled and that what they did had consequences, real ones, and for once she did not have a response ready, and the silence on the other end of the line was louder than anything she had ever said to me. I do not know what happens next with them. Maybe they will try to fight it. Maybe they will pretend none of this happened. But for the first time, it does not matter, because I have a way out now, and they cannot take it from me again. The writer in the next story learns that being called unstable is often just another way to silence someone who is telling the truth. Once the adults decide the story for you, every move becomes harder, but the first crack appears the moment the writer refuses to accept the lie as reality. That is where real courage starts, not with shouting, but with quietly gathering enough truth to stand on later. So let us move into the next story and follow the moment when control starts to lose its grip. The day my parents tried to erase my future and replace it with theirs. I realized something was wrong when my portfolio case felt too light, like it had been hollowed out, and my chest dropped before I even opened it because I already knew my parents had done something irreversible. My name is Daniel, I am 17, and that black case held 2 years of my life, charcoal studies, oil portraits, figure drawings I snuck in at community college classes, everything I needed to get into the only schools I cared about. And when I unlatched it in my bedroom, all I found inside were a few blank sheets and one of my older sketches I had thrown away months ago like some kind of insult. I didn't even yell at first. I just walked downstairs holding the empty case like evidence and found my mom, Karen, and my dad, Michael, sitting at the kitchen table already waiting for me like they had rehearsed this moment. Karen gave me this tight smile and said, "Daniel, we need to talk about your future." And that's when the panic turned into something sharper, something that made my hands shake. I asked them where my work was, and Michael didn't answer right away, just folded his hands like he was about to negotiate a business deal, then finally said, "We handled it." That phrase, "we handled it," made my stomach flip because it meant they had taken control of something that was never theirs. I kept pushing louder now, asking what they did, where my portfolio was, and Karen said, almost casually, "We mailed it out this morning." For 1 second I thought maybe they had actually sent it to the schools. Maybe they had come around, but then she added, "To a recycling center, Daniel." It's time to be realistic. I don't remember deciding to shout, but suddenly I was yelling so hard my throat hurt, asking how they could do that, how they could throw away everything I had worked for, and Michael slammed his hand on the table and told me to stop being dramatic, that art was a hobby, not a life, and that they had already fixed things for me. That word "fixed" made me feel sick, and Karen stood up and walked over to the counter and picked up a neat stack of envelopes and handed them to me like a prize. "These came for you," she said, and I could tell she was proud of herself. I opened the first one with shaking hands and saw the name of a business program I had never applied to. A formal acceptance letter congratulating me on my admission, talking about my essay on leadership and financial innovation, words I had never written. The next envelope was the same, and the next, until I had 4 acceptance letters to schools I didn't even recognize, all for business degrees I didn't want, all based on applications I had never submitted. I looked up at them and asked how this was possible, and Michael said, completely calm, "We helped you apply. We used your transcripts, your achievements. We wrote what you were too immature to write yourself." That's when it clicked. They hadn't just destroyed my portfolio. They had replaced my future with one they designed, forged essays, fake recommendation letters, probably emails sent from accounts I didn't know about, and they expected me to just step into it like it was always mine. I told them this was fraud, that this was insane, and Karen's face hardened and she said, "What's insane is throwing your life away chasing something that won't pay your bills." Then she went further, like she always does, comparing me to other people. Saying how my cousin Eric was already interning at a firm, how my friend Jason had practical goals, how everyone else my age was moving forward while I was stuck drawing pictures, and that comparison cut deeper than anything because it was the same script they had used for years to make me doubt myself. I wish I could say I had some brilliant response right then, but honestly I felt cornered, like they had isolated every option and closed it off. Because my work was gone, the deadlines for some schools were days away, and the people who were supposed to support me had sabotaged me instead. But something shifted in me when Michael said, "You'll thank us one day," because I realized if I didn't fight right then, there would be no version of my life left that belonged to me. I left the house without asking, grabbed my phone, and called the recycling center listed on a shipping receipt I found in the trash. My hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone, and when a guy named Lewis answered, I tried to explain everything in one breath, that my parents had sent a package that wasn't supposed to be destroyed, that it was my artwork, that I needed it back. There was a long pause, and then Lewis said they had received a large envelope batch that morning, but it hadn't been processed yet, and if I could get there within an hour, there was a chance. I didn't even think, I just ran, borrowed my neighbor's bike because my parents had taken my car keys weeks ago to limit distractions, and I rode harder than I ever had, my legs burning, my head filled with every worst-case scenario. When I got there, the place was louder than I expected, machines humming, stacks of paper everywhere, and I found Lewis, a guy in his 30s who looked confused but concerned, and he helped me search through a pile of incoming mail bags. Every second felt like a countdown, and then finally I saw it, my black portfolio case shoved into a larger shipping box, still sealed. I don't think I've ever felt relief like that, like my lungs actually worked again, and I thanked him probably 10 times while opening it right there to make sure everything was still inside. It was all there, slightly bent in places but intact. My work, my effort, my future, not erased yet. When I got back home, Karen and Michael were waiting again, but this time I wasn't the one on the defensive. I put the case on the table, opened it in front of them, and told them I knew exactly what they had done, including the forged applications, and that if they tried anything like this again, I would report it to the schools, to the authorities, whoever I had to, because what they did was not parenting, it was control. Michael tried to interrupt, but I kept going, telling them I would be submitting my real applications myself, using my own work, and that I didn't need their permission to pursue what I cared about. Karen looked stunned, like she hadn't expected me to push back that hard, and for the first time, neither of them had a script ready. I wish I could say everything magically improved after that, but it didn't. The house got colder, conversations got shorter, and the pressure didn't disappear, but something important had changed. They knew I wouldn't just fold. I sent out my applications the next day, every single one, and weeks later, when the real acceptance letters started coming in, from actual art schools that had seen my work. It felt like reclaiming something that had almost been taken from me permanently. I still live with Karen and Michael for now, and things are complicated, but that day taught me exactly how far they were willing to go and exactly how far I had to go to protect myself. And if I hadn't opened that empty case when I did, if I had waited even a few hours longer, everything I built might have been gone for good, replaced by a life that looked stable on paper but wasn't mine in any real sense. When the parents in this story tried to make their child choose between a future and a family, they revealed how little room they had ever left for the writer to breathe. The pressure was meant to force surrender, but instead it exposed just how desperate they had become to keep power. That kind of desperation often grows when someone sees freedom getting close, and the next story carries that same ache of wanting to protect a dream from the people who should have protected it first. So let us step into that next story together and keep listening. My parents said they'd kill themselves if I ever chose art over them. The first time my mom said she would rather die than watch me throw my life away. I was standing in the kitchen holding a sketchbook I had hidden behind the cereal boxes, and I remember thinking she was joking, because no normal person says something like that to their own kid. But she didn't laugh, she just stared at me with this dead serious look, while my dad leaned against the counter nodding like she had just said something completely reasonable and not completely insane. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't about art anymore. This was about control. My name is Daniel, I am 17, and for as long as I can remember, drawing has been the only thing that makes my brain feel quiet, like everything lines up for a second instead of constantly buzzing, and I never thought that would become the reason my parents started treating me like an enemy in my own house. It started small, like comments about how artists starve, or how I was too smart to waste my life, but then it escalated into full-blown comparisons. My dad constantly bringing up Marcus Lee from down the street who got into a top engineering program. My mom printing out acceptance rates and taping them to my bedroom door like some kind of warning. And every time I tried to push back, they would twist it into me being ungrateful for everything they sacrificed. The night everything really broke was when I told them I wanted to apply to an art program. I didn't even say I would go, I just said I wanted the option. And my mom started crying instantly. Not normal crying, but loud, choking sobs like someone had died. And then she said that if I chose that path, she would not be able to live with herself. That she might as well end things now, because clearly she had failed as a mother, and my dad backed her up, telling me I would have to live knowing I destroyed our family if anything happened to her. And I just stood there frozen, because how do you respond to that without feeling like a monster? After that, every time I even mentioned drawing or showed interest in anything creative, the threats came back, sometimes subtle, sometimes direct, like my dad casually saying he did not see the point in living if his son turned out to be a disappointment, and it got into my head in a way I could not shake, like every decision I made had a body count attached to it. I stopped talking about art completely, but I did not stop doing it. I just hid it better, sketching late at night, storing my work in a folder on a USB drive I kept taped under my desk, and that secret became the only thing that felt like mine. The problem was the guilt kept getting worse, and I started feeling like I was living two lives, one where I was their obedient son preparing for a future I did not want, and one where I was actually myself, and the gap between those two versions of me was tearing me apart. I decided to try therapy because I knew I was not okay. I was barely sleeping, constantly anxious, jumping every time my phone buzzed, so I found a local therapist online and booked an appointment using my own email, thinking that would be enough to keep it private, which in hindsight was naive. 2 days later, my mom walked into my room holding a printed confirmation email and asked me if I had something to tell her, and my stomach dropped so hard I thought I was going to throw up, because I had not told them anything, and I realized they must have gone through my email, which meant there was no privacy left at all. She told me it was inappropriate to go behind their backs like that, and that if I needed help we would do it as a family, and my dad said therapy only works if the whole system is involved, which sounded reasonable enough in the moment that I let them take control of it, which was my second mistake. They scheduled what they called a family counseling session the next week, and I went in thinking maybe this could actually help. Maybe having a third party would make them realize how extreme they were being. But the second we sat down I knew something was off because the therapist, a woman named Karen Whitmore, greeted my parents like she already knew them. And they immediately started talking before I could even say a word, framing everything as me being rebellious, secretive, and obsessed with unrealistic dreams. And every time I tried to explain my side, they would interrupt or correct me, and Karen would nod along, occasionally asking me leading questions like why I felt the need to reject my parents' guidance. I left that session feeling worse than before, like I had just been put on trial and lost. It did not stop there. They scheduled more sessions, each one reinforcing the same narrative that I was the problem, that my parents were just concerned, that my interests were a phase, and I started to doubt myself, like maybe I really was being selfish, maybe wanting something different was a kind of betrayal. The turning point came when I accidentally found the real email from the therapist I originally contacted, buried in my spam folder, because my parents had set up filters on my account, and it included a note asking if I was safe at home after I missed the appointment, and something about that snapped me out of it, because it was the first time someone had even considered that I might not be okay in this situation. That night I copied all my artwork onto a second USB, packed a small bag, and messaged the therapist from a new account explaining everything in as much detail as I could, including the threats, the fake sessions, the email monitoring, all of it. And I did not expect a response right away, but she replied within an hour, telling me what my parents were doing was emotional coercion, and that I was not responsible for their threats or their choices, and reading that felt like someone finally cut through the noise in my head. The next morning things escalated fast because my dad found my bag and demanded to know what I was planning, and for the first time I did not back down. I told him I was going to get help whether they liked it or not, and he went straight to the usual line, saying if I walked out that door, I might as well not come back because it would kill my mother. And I remember my hands shaking, but I also remember realizing that if I stayed, I was the one who was going to disappear, just slowly instead of all at once. I walked out anyway. My mom was crying behind me, my dad was yelling, and every step felt like I was doing something irreversible, but also like I was finally breathing. I stayed with my friend Jason and his older sister Mia for a few days while I figured things out. And with the therapist's help I reported everything, the threats, the monitoring, the manipulation, and it turned into a whole situation involving school counselors and eventually legal intervention, which I never thought would happen in my life, but at that point there was no going back. My parents tried to contact me constantly, switching between guilt and anger, but for the first time I had people around me who saw it clearly and did not let me get pulled back in. I am still dealing with the fallout, still figuring out what my future looks like, but I know one thing for sure: I am not responsible for my parents' choices, and I am not going to sacrifice my entire life just to keep them from facing themselves, because that is not love, that is a cage, and I am done living in it. There is something heartbreaking about parents who use guilt as a leash and call it love, because it turns tenderness into a weapon. The writer in the last story stood in the middle of that cruelty and still kept trying to hold on to art, which says a lot about how strong that inner life really was. The damage was real, but so was the refusal to disappear, and that is the thread that leads us forward. Now we go to the next story together and see what happens when private truth gets dragged into public view. My parents leaked my private art blog to my entire school and then threw a party to celebrate me giving up. I found out because my phone wouldn't stop vibrating during third period, and by the time I checked it, my entire life had already been turned inside out. It started with a message from Daniel Cruz that just said, "Jude, is this you?" followed by screenshots I recognized instantly, my blog, my words, the ones I wrote at 2 a.m. when I couldn't breathe, and the only thing that made sense was drawing and writing about it. Except now it wasn't just my words. It was my name attached to them, and captions I didn't write, captions like "Future Starving Artist Meltdown," and "This is what happens when you waste your life on doodles." My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might actually pass out at my desk. I scrolled and saw more entire posts, the one where I talked about how trapped I felt in my own house, how my dad Marcus compared me to my cousin Evan every single day, how my mom Teresa read my sketchbooks without asking and called them disturbing. They didn't just leak it, they curated it. They picked the most vulnerable parts and packaged them like some kind of exhibit. By lunch it wasn't just texts, people were whispering. A couple of kids laughed when I walked past. A girl I barely knew asked me if I was okay in that tone that means everyone already thinks you're broken. I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall and tried to figure out who did it, even though I already knew. My blog was private. No one had access except me, unless someone had gone through my laptop, unless someone had taken screenshots while I was asleep. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone, but I called home anyway, and my mom answered like nothing was wrong. I asked her straight up if she had seen my blog, and there was a pause that lasted just long enough to confirm everything before she said, "We need to talk when you get home." Not denial. Not confusion, just control. The rest of the school day felt like walking through a room where everyone knew something about me I never chose to share. When the final bell rang, I didn't even wait for Daniel or anyone. I just went home and found both of them sitting at the kitchen table like they had been waiting. My dad didn't even look up from his laptop when he said, "Sit down." I didn't sit. I asked them why. My mom folded her hands like she was about to give a presentation and said they were concerned about me, that the things I wrote were unhealthy and embarrassing for the family. My dad finally looked up and said something that snapped whatever was left of me trying to stay calm. He said you needed a reality check. I asked if they leaked it. He didn't answer directly. He just said people need to see where this path leads. That was it. No apology. No hesitation. They had decided that humiliating me publicly was a lesson. I remember laughing, not because it was funny, but because it was so insane I didn't know what else to do. I told them they didn't get to do that to me. My mom immediately switched tactics and said this was for my own good, that I was spiraling, that I was isolating myself with these fantasies of being an artist instead of focusing on a real future. Then my dad pulled out printed screenshots, my posts, highlighted like evidence in a trial. He started reading lines out loud. My words sounded completely different in his voice, like they had been twisted into something weak and pathetic. I grabbed the papers out of his hand and he stood up so fast his chair hit the wall. He told me I was done with the blog, done with the nonsense, and starting tomorrow I would be focusing on applications for business school. I told him no. I said it without thinking, just this raw reaction that came out before I could stop it. He stared at me like I had just insulted him in front of a crowd. He said we would continue this later because we had guests coming over. I didn't understand what he meant until people actually started arriving that evening. Family, my Aunt Linda, my Uncle Greg, my cousin Evan of course, even some family friends I hadn't seen in years. It felt like a normal gathering at first until my mom called everyone into the living room and clapped her hands like she was about to make an announcement. I was standing near the back, already on edge, when she put her hand on my shoulder and pulled me forward. She said she had wonderful news about me. I knew immediately. I tried to step back, but my dad's hand was suddenly on my other shoulder, firm. Not enough to hurt, but enough that I couldn't move without making a scene. My mom smiled at everyone and said I had finally seen reason and decided to move on from my childish artistic phase and pursue a serious career path. There were actual claps. My Uncle Greg said, "Good for you, kid." Evan smirked like he had just won something. I felt like I was watching someone else's life. My dad leaned in and said quietly, "Say something." That was the moment everything shifted for me. Up until then, I had just been reacting, trying to survive whatever they threw at me. But standing there, surrounded by people clapping for a version of me that didn't exist, I realized if I stayed quiet right then, this would be it. They would define me forever. So I stepped forward and said, "That's not true." The room went completely silent. My mom's smile froze. My dad's grip tightened. I pulled away anyway. I told everyone they had leaked my private blog to my school. I said it clearly, no shaking this time. I said they had taken my personal writing and used it to humiliate me because they couldn't control me any other way. My Aunt Linda looked confused. My Uncle Greg frowned. My dad tried to cut me off, but I kept going. I told them the screenshots going around, the ones some of them had probably already seen by now, came from inside our house. I said I wasn't giving up anything and that the only thing I had finally seen was how far my own parents were willing to go to force me into being someone I'm not. My mom tried to laugh it off, said I was being dramatic, but it didn't land. You could feel the shift in the room. People started looking at them differently. My cousin Evan actually asked, "Wait, you sent that stuff out?" And for the first time, my dad didn't have a clean answer. He just said we did what was necessary. That was enough. The rest of the night collapsed into awkward conversations and people leaving early. No one congratulated me again. No one celebrated anything. After everyone was gone, my parents tried to double down, grounding me, taking my laptop, telling me I had embarrassed them. But something had already broken in a way they couldn't fix. The next day at school, people still talked. Some of them still thought it was funny. But now there was another version of the story out there because I told it, because I didn't let them be the only voice. Daniel sat with me at lunch like nothing had changed. A few others did too. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. But it was mine. I started a new blog that week, public this time. Not because I wanted attention, but because I refused to hide anymore. They can read it if they want, they can hate it, they can try to control everything else. But they don't get to decide who I am, not after what they did, not after I said it out loud in front of everyone and watched their version of me fall apart in real time. After everything that was done to that writer, the worst part was not only the betrayal, it was the way the people closest to them turned pain into a spectacle. They tried to humiliate what they could not control, but public shame is a weak tool when a person finally understands their own worth. That story reminds us that a private voice can still survive a public wound, and that is the lesson carried into the final piece. So let us settle in together and read the last story now. I found out my parents were ruining my life online in my name and calling it parenting. The first time I realized something was seriously wrong was when Marcus texted me at 2:13 a.m. asking why I had called his sister a talentless charity case on my art page. I was half asleep and thought it was a joke until he sent me a screenshot of my own account with my profile picture and my name plastered on a post I had never written. It wasn't just rude, it was vicious in a way that didn't even sound like me, like someone trying too hard to sound edgy and cruel. My stomach dropped because I knew immediately this wasn't some random hack. The tone felt familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. By morning, I had 12 missed calls and 3 collaborators pulling out of the short film we had been planning for months. Lena said she couldn't be associated with someone that unstable. Javier didn't even text me back. I tried logging into my account, but the password didn't work. When I checked the recovery email, it had been changed to something I didn't recognize. I was locked out of my own name while someone else was actively destroying it. I ran downstairs and asked my mom, Karen, if she knew anything about it, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't even look surprised. She just stirred her coffee and said maybe this is what happens when you spend too much time online and not enough time thinking about consequences. That was when I knew. My dad, Robert, walked in and told me to sit down because we needed to have a serious conversation about responsibility. They showed me more posts from the account, worse ones, attacking other artists, making it seem like I was impossible to work with. Then Robert said something that made everything click into place. He said this is exactly why you're not ready to handle your own career, you sabotage yourself. I felt like the room tilted. I asked him directly if they had access to my account and he didn't deny it. He said, as your parents, we have every right to monitor and guide your behavior, especially when your future is on the line. I couldn't even process it at first because it was so insane. They had created a duplicate account in my name weeks ago, slowly building followers by reposting my actual work, then started posting offensive content to poison my reputation. They were manufacturing evidence that I was irresponsible. When I tried to grab my phone to show them proof that I hadn't posted anything, my mom took it out of my hand and said, clearly you can't be trusted with this right now. That was the moment something snapped in me. I wasn't just being controlled, I was being erased. Over the next 2 days, everything unraveled faster than I could react. The film project collapsed completely. Marcus stopped responding after saying he needed distance. Lena blocked me. Even my art teacher, Mr. Caldwell, called me into his office and asked if I needed counseling because of my recent behavior. I tried explaining, but it sounded like a pathetic excuse. I couldn't prove anything because the account looked completely legitimate and my parents controlled all my devices. At home they leaned into it harder, telling me this was a learning moment, that I needed supervision until I could demonstrate maturity. They restricted my internet access, took my laptop, and told relatives I was going through a phase. Every time I protested, they pointed to the account as proof. Look at what you did, Robert would say, as if repetition could make it true. I started noticing patterns though. The posts always went up when I was at school or asleep. The writing had certain phrases my mom used all the time, like frankly speaking and let's be honest here. It was like they couldn't help leaving fingerprints. I knew I needed actual evidence, not just accusations. So I borrowed my friend Ethan's old phone at school and created a new anonymous account. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of timestamps, writing patterns, even recording audio at home when my parents talked about teaching me a lesson. The real turning point came when I overheard them in the kitchen one night. Karen was laughing about how effective the posts were, and Robert said once he's completely isolated, he'll have no choice but to rely on us again. Hearing it out loud made my chest tighten in a way I can't fully describe. It wasn't about protecting me, it was about control. The next day I went to Mr. Caldwell with everything. At first he looked skeptical, but when I showed him the recordings, his entire expression changed. He asked if I felt safe at home, and that question hit harder than anything else because I didn't have a simple answer. He contacted the school administration, and within hours things escalated beyond anything my parents expected. They were called in for a meeting. I sat across from them while the principal, Ms. Harding, played the recordings out loud. Watching their faces shift from confident to cornered was surreal. Karen tried to say it was taken out of context. Robert tried to argue they were exercising parental guidance. But it didn't hold up. Impersonating your own kid to sabotage his reputation is not guidance, it's abuse. The school contacted a legal advisor and things moved quickly after that. I finally got access back to my accounts and posted a full explanation with evidence. It didn't magically fix everything. Some people still didn't believe me. Marcus never came back, but others did. Lena actually apologized after seeing the proof and admitted she should have asked before cutting me off. The fake account was taken down and flagged. My parents were forced into counseling, and there were discussions about guardianship boundaries that I didn't fully understand, but I knew one thing had changed. They couldn't control the narrative anymore. At home, things are still tense. They don't admit what they did was wrong in the way I want them to. They frame it as a mistake in execution rather than intent, but they don't have access to my accounts anymore, and they don't take my devices. For the first time in a long time, I feel like my work actually belongs to me again. I'm rebuilding slowly. New project, new collaborators, people who know the full story from the start. It's not the same as before. There's a kind of permanent crack in how I trust people now, especially the ones who are supposed to protect you. But I'd rather deal with that than live inside a version of myself someone else created to keep me small. The worst part isn't even what they did. It's how easily it almost worked. If I hadn't pushed back, if I had just accepted their version of reality, I would have lost everything that makes me who I am and believed I deserved it. We came all the way through stories about control, stolen chances, and quiet bravery, and the truth stayed the same the whole time. A person does not become smaller just because someone else is determined to make them feel that way. Boundaries matter, truth matters, and the part of you that knows what is yours must be protected early and without apology. When the world gets loud and unfair, keep your footing, keep your voice, and keep the people who see you clearly close. Take care of yourselves, establish those boundaries early, and sweet dreams, everyone.